I'm going to say here, you know, I didn't want to spend a lot of time talking about this, but, you know, this model, I used it to actually develop a tool. Okay, it's called Sports Recovery Tracker, and it's a web-based application. And this tool allows players and coaches to track and monitor their training load simply by creating an account, logging in, and entering those values for volume and intensity every day. A player can do it, and they can look at their own numbers for as long as they want. And coaches can sign up and then add players to their account, so coaches can look at individual players, but also their entire team. And you know, Anthony, I'll give more information about this maybe later on, and I can send it to anyone who's interested. And you know, there is a small fee with this product, so it's not free, but we charge only $1 a month. It's not really expensive, and it's something that just gives you kind of the analytics side of tracking this information rather than just writing it down on a piece of paper or putting it into Excel. So that's what Sports Recovery Tracker does, and it also allows you to track some other metrics, including recovery, hydration, and injuries. So it's something that I created, and again, back to my own experience, that even at the highest levels, like in the amateur level, nobody has resources for technology, but even at the highest levels, a lot of players and coaches don't. So this was, I created this product literally just to try to address that need. In a way, again, there's a small fee, but it's really not a prohibitive fee, because it's only $12 a year. That's all it is. So anyway, so that's the website, sportsrecoverytracker.com. And if there's some questions at the end, we can talk more about it. Didn't want to speak too much about it, so we can get into now part two again of this presentation, which is about training. And as I mentioned, the soccer fitness way. It's my way. It's the way that I like to do it, based on my own experience and my knowledge, and how I do it following these principles. But again, as we did before, we have to get into a famous quote. Okay, I'll tell you right now, it's not me that said this, but it's a great quote. It's a simple quote, but I think there's something really valuable to be taken there. And it's, soccer is not running. Who said it? Okay, and I know there were some guesses before. I'll tell you, not only was it not me, it was not Leo Messi, it was not Johan Cruyff, and it was not well, it wasn't anyone else that the guesses came before. So we'll give you about 30 seconds to try to take a shot at who said this. Soccer is not running. Anybody? Oh, here they come in the chat now. Pep Guardiola. You know what? It's not a bad guess. He probably did say it, but I can't give him credit, because I know for a fact that this person who said it was around before Guardiola. Well, before Guardiola became a coach, anyway. So it's not credited to him, as far as I can see. But it's a good guess, and I'm sure he probably agrees with it. Alex, we're talking Ferguson. Yeah, no, but again, very well could be. So good guesses, and I'll leave it at that, because I think we could go forever. You might not guess this one, because it depends how old you are, but this is who said it. Okay, his name is Romario, and I have to tell you, a lot of times when I do these presentations, I always revert back to the players from my generation, because I just that's when I had nothing else to do but watch soccer and play soccer. So there's great players now, but this guy is, not everybody knows about him, but he was easily one of the best strikers in the world for a very long time in the 90s, and won a World Cup for Brazil, 1994. And he didn't really like to run a lot, and he didn't run a lot, but he scored a lot of goals. And there's a great story that a book that I read talks about this. It's called The Simplest Game. James Gardner, a great English writer, but in this game he talks. Gardner speaks about right in the lead up to the 1994 World Cup, which Brazil actually won. Okay, but if anybody knows what was happening at the time, Brazil almost didn't qualify for that World Cup. They were struggling, and this would have been the first time ever that Brazil didn't get to a World Cup. At that time, I mean, these days I think the Europeans maybe have taken the taken the spotlight away from Brazil, but at that time, Brazil would have still been thought of as one of the best. They hadn't won in a little while, but they had they'd won 3 World Cups, and only Italy at the time had also won 3. In any case, they were struggling. They almost didn't qualify, and partly was because Romario was having a lot of problems with the coach, and he was being benched. And at one point, he even left him out of the team for a few of their qualifying matches. And so Brazil had 2 games to go. and they had to win both to qualify. They had Colombia and Bolivia, and they had to play Bolivia in La Paz, which is, if you know Bolivia, La Paz, I think it's about 1,500 meters altitude. It's high up there, and it's like tough to go there. South American qualification, I'm biased because I lived in South America. So South American qualification for the World Cup is the hardest thing that any country has to do. There are no easy games, and you have to go, to Peru, Bolivia, these places where you have to play up in the mountains, and it's really tough. Anyway, they needed to win, and Romario, I guess there was this big controversy in Brazil about, everybody in the country wanted Romario to be in the team, but the coach Pereira, was arguing with him and didn't want him. So they interviewed Romario in the newspaper, and he said, "I'll come back. I want to come back, but I have to. If I come back, I'm going to tell the coach right now, I'm not training. I'm just scoring goals. That's all I'm doing." And he actually was quoted as saying this: "I'm not going to train. I'm just going to score goals." And the reality is that the pressure was so high that the coach agreed. He took him back into the team, more or less, despite the fact that he didn't want to train. And if you know the history, then you know that in Bolivia, Romario, they beat Bolivia 2-0, and Romario scored both goals. So pretty much after that, you can never tell Romario anything else. They beat Colombia as well. They qualified for the World Cup. They won the World Cup. I'm pretty sure he scored 5 goals in that tournament. It was basically him and Roberto Baggio were the two best players there, and they played in the final, and Brazil won. So anyway, so soccer is not running. Okay, this is a powerful quote, and I just, everybody needs to understand this as a player, as a coach. You can get in shape for soccer while running, but it is not the best way to get in shape for soccer. And I don't want to come off as a hypocrite here, because our company now is called Speed Training. We've got a really nice facility here in Toronto where we have fast running treadmills, and we do a lot of running training for soccer and for lots of other sports, and it's great. But it does not replace the training that you have to do on the field, the physical training in soccer or in any other sport. And that's because soccer is not running. It's not the same. So you need, really, if you wanted to guess, what would I say that you need to do in order to get in shape for soccer is that you need to play soccer, not just running. Okay, you can get in shape by running, but it's not optimal. Again, this is complicated information. I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible. There are 3 ways that we deliver energy to perform work in soccer. One is through the anaerobic alactic system. That system provides energy for short duration, high intensity actions, sprints, tackles, jumps, the things that happen quickly, more or less 1, 2, 3 seconds of high intensity actions. And you can imagine, if you watch a game, I'm sure you all have watched and played and coached and everything, that these actions happen all the time in soccer. And it's the anaerobic alactic system that provides the energy to do them. The second is the anaerobic lactic system, okay? That is for sustained high intensity actions. They're a little more rare in soccer, but they happen. A good analogy I like to use is maybe when a team is pressing. So you've got a group of players that are sprinting for more than a few seconds at a time, especially if they don't win the ball right away, or maybe a recovery run after, let's say a corner kick or a counterattack or something like that. So alactic energy, that's short duration, high intensity. The lactic energy system, that's for sustained high intensity actions. And then we have the aerobic system. We're talking the heart and lungs here, and that's for recovery in between those high intensity actions. So if you're a player or if you're a coach and you have players that are struggling with performing the sprints, like they're not fast enough or they can't sustain it, that means they're lacking a bit in their anaerobic system, either the alactic or the lactic. And if you have a player that is just getting tired as the game progresses and they're struggling with recovery in between the sprints, and typically this happens in the second half and as the game goes on, then that means they're lacking in their aerobic system. They're not able to recover as much in between the high intensity actions. So all 3 of those systems, okay, are used in soccer often. And so all 3 of them need to be trained. The good news, and remember, I'll draw your attention back to the activity pattern that I talked about. And remember, we showed it as a fractal, that even in a training session, it's a wave-like pattern like this, right? Okay. All soccer activity, and all other sports too, by the way, not just soccer, they have this activity pattern. This is what it is. Okay, you have to remember, this is when I teach this, I say just burn this into your brain for planning training. Sprint, rest, sprint. That's it. That's what soccer looks like in the game. That's what soccer has to look like when you train. Sprint, rest, sprint, and repeat that over and over. What changes, and this is where the art comes in, is the variables within the sprint periods and the rest periods. And again, it's an oversimplification. I know it's 6 o'clock. I don't want to go too much longer because I know we have questions and everything. But this is it. This is soccer training in a nutshell. You sprint, you rest, you sprint again, but you play around with the length of the sprint, the time, the intensity, how much rest, how many you do, and so on. All three systems, the anaerobic alactic, that's the short duration high intensity, the anaerobic lactic, that's the sustained high intensity, and the aerobic, which is recovery, really is about recovery between. They can all be trained in this way, okay? And in the next few minutes, I'm going to hopefully show you how. So here we go. How do we do it? Let's start with the aerobic system. Okay, again, think of that pattern. Sprint, rest, sprint. This is how you do it. Within the sprint or the high intensity period, it can last 30 seconds up to 10 minutes. Could be a 30-second 1v1 activity, could be an 8 to 10 minute game. 30 seconds to 1 minute. We want the intensity to be high, but that's the time constraints that you have. You could do it with small-sided games. You could do it with technical, passing, shooting exercises, and so on. You could do it with running intervals. Again, soccer is not running, but you can train by running if you want to. You lose specificity when you do that. Okay. The speed or the intensity of the sprint has to be moderate to high. And remember, we talked about that RPE, that rating of perceived exertion. It's not going to be maximum. It's not going to be 10 out of 10, but it's got to be 7 or 8, 70 to 80%. This is where that undertraining thing comes in. Think about this. If there's any coaches that are watching this, at the amateur level, if you asked your players at the end of your training, how hard was this? And they told you 5 or 4, right? That's not good enough to train the aerobic system. It's got to be 7. It's got to be 70 to 80%, not maximum, but high. Okay. And then, we talked about the sprint. So the rest, well, the time interval of the rest needs to be close to or equal to the time interval of the run or the work period. And then we have this thing called work to rest ratio. You can see here, the acronym is WRR, or work to rest ratio. We want it to be 1-to-1. So if it was 1-to-1, that would mean you work for 30 seconds, you rest for 30 seconds. You work for 5 minutes, you rest for 5 minutes. And it can go all the way up to 3-to-1. So just an example, and especially if you're going into longer games. For example, if you played a high intensity game for 6 minutes and your work to rest ratio was 3-to-1, then you would only rest for 2 minutes. That's just that's on the higher end. You could play a high intensity game for 4 minutes and rest for 4 minutes, or whatever it is. So in any case, that's the ratio. The ratio is between 1-to-1 and 3-to-1. Okay. And the mode of rest can be either active or passive. So active rest means you're doing something while resting. Maybe you play the game and then you do, keep ups or a dribbling exercise or something in between. Passive means you're, standing still, getting water, catching your breath, resting. And you can do either one. Okay. So again, that's how you train the aerobic system with that sprint, rest, sprint model. And that's, how you do it, we'll say, the soccer fitness way. So let's now that we've looked at the aerobic system, now let's look at the anaerobic systems, and we'll start with the lactic system. And remember, the lactic system, that's energy for sustained high intensity activity, sustained over a longer period of time. Here's how the sprint has to look. We want 10 seconds up to 90 seconds. So it's got to be longer than 10 seconds. Because if it's not longer than 10 seconds, then you're not actually developing any lactic acid. And really 90 seconds is the upper limit. I'm going to just ask anybody, because we're talking, the intensity is very high here. Okay. You can use small-sided games. You can use technical exercises. You can use sprint intervals, but the intensity has to be very high. Okay. We're talking about 100% and the overall activity, 9 to 10 out of 10. Why am I suggesting that you cannot go longer than 90 seconds with that high intensity? Somebody needs to, in the chat, just tell me why. Why am I not saying that you can go at 100% intensity for 10 minutes? Yeah, Zion, you'd be fatigued a lot. So I would say you'd be fatigued a lot. You'd actually be so fatigued, there's no way you could even do it. You cannot, I don't care how athletic you are, right? Or how well trained you are, okay? Nobody can sprint at a high intensity, at a maximum intensity anyway, for longer than about 1 minute, and 90 seconds is the upper limit. And if anyone has ever done, track and field or whatever, you'll see. Okay, I mean, I was an 800-meter runner back in the day. That was about 2 minutes of running almost as fast as I could. And after that 2 minutes, I couldn't do any other exercise for 2 days. So you can't sprint for long. You can't sustain high intensity exercise for a long period of time. So that's why the window, the time interval for the sprint or whatever you're doing is 10 to 90 seconds. It cannot be longer than 90. And really, if you're going even close to, even if you're going longer than 30 or 40 seconds, you're going to need a lot of rest. So let's talk about the rest period. So we understand the work period. Okay, the rest, it's got to be 30 up to 10 minutes. So the work to rest ratio, this is the key difference between anaerobic and aerobic training. With aerobic training, you can have a work to rest ratio of 1:1. But with anaerobic, or even 2:1, you can even have more work than rest, or longer work than rest. But with anaerobic training, you need a lot more rest, 1:3 up to 1:10. And again, if it's a small side, maybe it's a 2v2 game in a small field, very intense. Maybe you want to play it for 1 minute, very intense. You're going to need to make sure that after that 1 minute that they rest for 3 minutes before they go again, or else what's going to happen to the intensity of the next repetition? It's going to go down. And if it goes down, you're not training this system anymore. Then you're training the aerobic system. And again, I hope it makes sense, because it's a long, again, in my courses, these concepts we may take several hours to teach them, and so I'm simplifying it a bit more. But that's the idea, is that to train the anaerobic lactic system, you need sustained high intensity actions, 10 seconds up to 90, but you need a long work to rest ratio, 1:3, 1:10, and that rest must be passive. Why? Because players are going to be exhausted. So you don't want to have them do a 60-second sprint or high intensity action and then have them go and play with the ball and do. They're just going to need to stand, walk around, catch their breath, get some water, and wait until they've recovered a bit before they can do it again. So that's the anaerobic lactic system.